Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. And in this episode, we are speaking with Professor Min Ye, an author and an associate professor of international relations at the Frederick S. Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. Her expertise includes Chinese political economy, China and India comparison, East Asian international relations and globalization, with focuses on transnational immigration and foreign investment. We deep dive into a wide exploration of China's outbound foreign direct investment, the difference between China's bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements, the future of the Belt and Road Initiative, and Professor Ye's take on the US-China relations with the new Biden administration, and bringing it all together in a positive fashion towards the end, looking at the different opportunities for the US to collaborate together with China moving forward. Enjoy.
I think many people dismiss Biden's change in style from Trump administration as being insignificant, and I disagree. In dealings with China, style matters hugely. I feel like Americans suddenly forgot that it's about faith and relationship.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Min Ye, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure.
So maybe let's start with a quick introduction of yourself and the work that you're focusing on.
Okay, so I am an expert in Chinese and Asian political economy. So I work on the subjects that are in the intersections between domestic politics and global politics and economics and security. So my main publications are in 3 books. And so the first one is Making of Northeast Asia 2010 book, and looks at domestic politics or regional integration in Asia. And the second book is 2014 Cambridge University Press book, Diasporas and Foreign Direct Investment in China and India. And so the recent book, hopefully it's not the last book, the recent book is Belt, Road, and Beyond, State Mobilized Globalization in China from 1998 to 2018 from the Cambridge University Press. So again, I focus on Asia, globalization, China, and India.
That's an amazing and well done on that description of what you do. You must have said that before. How hard is it, given the topics that you're talking about, because those things are changing every day? So let me add, like that first book that you wrote, 2010, The Making of Northeast Asia, how long was that relevant?
In that book, actually, I got most loyalty from. And the reason, of course, was I cover regionalism, and for people who continue to work on regionalism, and they will relate to that book. And the regionalism has changed a lot. So in my way as a scholar is to find a conceptual framework that stays. Right? So for Asian regionalism, because I understand that domestic politics in Asia typically shape their regional economic policies. And so I created this framework called critical juncture. And so when crises occur, then domestic leadership and policy networks interact across country, and then that leads to new institution building in the region. So that structure is still relevant, although the Chiang Mai Initiative may have evolved and the ASEAN Plus 3 has changed, and East East Asia Summit is almost dormant, but now we have RCEP, right? So the Regional Comprehensive Economic Cooperation, and that again is in line with this regionalism. And same thing with China and India book. I look at the diasporas, so how external agents, co-ethnic external agents and investors, they shape domestic deliberation of policies toward FDI in China and in India. So by going through their decades of policy change toward FDI and how the co-ethnic agents or investors play a part, that kind of dynamic still go on. And with BRI, right? BRI is only 7 years old, but the West has experienced the waves of debates and the literature on it. That's because they always look at the BRI as one thing, and yet it's not one thing. But it's integrated by China's domestic politics, right? So this is how I approach BRI, and I find the domestic actors and the dynamics of policy change and policy process apply to BRI, but also apply to previous grand strategies like Western Development Program and the China Goes Global strategy, right? So that really the phenomena drives BRI is a phenomena that has driven China's economic globalization since 1998. Right? So I think that kind of, as a scholar, you always want to have a show of life, but when you can carry explanation that can help us understand new changes and new phenomena, that's how you get around, because things do change very quickly. Anything that's on China, like one day it's a hot topic, the second day it's already overstudied.
I think it's important to understand how far back some policies or even, cultural diagrams go, because if we want to say this is what's going on and where is it going to go, really the best chance we have is to really extrapolate the past until now and that path into the future. And obviously the farther back we can go to be able to make that extrapolation and to then be able to start to lay out some assumptions, the farther back we can go, the better.
Yeah, but I think the Chinese, if we think about China and globalization or the Chinese state capitalism, that does have changed. Even just in the reform era, I think from the 1980s to 1990s, they are more into building up the structure of capitalism, right? The kinds of bureaucracy were not there. The kinds of human capital, technocrats, and policy knowledge expertise were not there. So the post 1998 development that actually is different from the previous 20 years. But then after 1998, the types of state capitalism structure, the relationship of the leadership, the bureaucracy, and the state-owned companies and local governments, these institutions, these domestic institutions that were set. So you kind of can observe how they operate in the last 20 years. And that, I think, will continue for some time.
Let's start talking a little bit about the foreign direct investment aspect and China's outbound foreign direct investment particularly. How has it evolved over the past 10 years? What is the current status?
I, again, see China as an economy in the world in Asia. So China is a latecomer economy in Asia. So China missed the East Asian miracle from the 1950s to 1970s. So when China opened in the late 1970s and starting the 1980s, it embraced FDI. Right? And that's very unusual from other East Asian countries. That's because China had to leapfrog its technology manufacturing skills and had to join very rapidly in the regional production network and to make exports quickly to earn foreign exchange, right? So, but the Chinese opening to FDI, so that's why China's joining globalization actually changed the global trends and the discourse on FDI. Right? So China, but then when China joined the WTO and when its domestic manufacturing foundations were kind of laid, and then it's still lagging behind on the outbound investment. So in short, for a very long time, China prioritized inbound FDI, but restricted outbound FDI. So from 2001 to 2008, even when China joined the World Trade Organization and China increased outbound FDI, but those outbound FDI was, number one, much smaller than the inbound FDI. The trend is going the opposite way. And they also mainly serve China's goal to upgrade domestic manufacturing, to upgrade exports. And so it's to acquire resources, to acquire technology, and to acquire logistic support, helping China export. So the real change in its outbound investments or capital starts in 2008, and when the global financial crisis occurred, and the trouble Western capital left lots of holes for China to fill. But this time, the Chinese going out capital was less FDI, but financing, state-led financing, so acquisition of resources, infrastructure, and development financing launched by China's policy banks. Those, I think, it kind of built the China's presence overseas, but it's also again serving domestic market than international business needs. And when BRI was launched, and then China's policy restricting outbound investment loosened. And so these policies typically, so again, China's policy had this inherent imperative to control and not let money go out. But when you had the BRI and had this crisis, then the money was loosened to go out. And so in 2014, this is the first year that China's outbound investment was larger than inbound investment. So China became a net investor. And we saw rapid growth from 2014 to 2017. But then we realized that when Chinese money went out too much, then external backlash was also very clear. On the other hand, as we go back to the Beijing's thinking, right, they were very careful on money outflow. So they also tightened the control of outbound flows. So starting 2018, we begin to see the decline and then stagnation of outbound FDI. But the level that it stagnates is much higher than 2014. So we can say China is a net investor, not as big as we would like to see, but it's now an investor, and this trend will continue.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that I was going to ask that I think we actually got to a little bit there. One of them was, talking about outbound FDI. Is it going to be used? Is it used for political reasons primarily or economic reasons? I think you kind of alluded to the fact that it is probably the second, it's the latter. It is much more for economic reasons. So would you, just to comment, much more economic than political?
Yeah, so I think the political driver was blown out of proportion. And that's even when the political thinking was behind the strategic policy at very high level. But once the policy got into implementation, it's the investors' decision, right? Either they are state-owned companies or private companies, and even state-owned companies, they operate under a profit and safety of the assets condition, right? So and so from that point of view, the investors, they are interested how much return, how safe the investment are. So from the BRI process, if we look at the project level calculations, then the commercial calculations by investors are by far the most salient. What the investors in my interview, for example, they say, this how much return. This investment return like 20% outside China. If they do it inside China, then that's less than 10%. Then their choice is try to expand international business and making higher earning. And when that calculation didn't work, they stay at home. Right? So I have another journal article, for example, we find for small-scaled investors, and when they think about investing abroad or staying locally, and they stay locally because investing abroad appears to be less effective and with less return than staying locally.
We can't help when we're talking about outbound FDI to really dovetail into the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. But I'm going to hold off on that for just a sec. And I want to talk a little bit about, I want to ask you first, just real quick, where is outbound FDI going to head over the next, even just 5 years?
Okay, so under the BRI, and in the last 5 years, the top 10 destinations of China's outbound FDI, 7 of them are located in Southeast Asia. Right? So Singapore is the top, and then also Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia is a traditional investor place for China. And then the other 3 is Russia, Kazakhstan, and there's one more in Central Asia. But it's very clear, it will be these traditional heavy trading places with China. But I think the next 5 to 10 years may change, because just in last year, China had a lot of rethinking when other countries are fighting COVID. And one of the rethinking is to rearrange supply chains. And this, again, is a reactive but also proactive adjustment that they have to do, and then because of the COVID crisis, but also because of US-China relations deteriorating, right? So supply chains are being revamped. I haven't seen the specific maps. Perhaps China hasn't drawn a specific map, but the principle is clear. It's creating more resilient and repetitive, smaller supply chains. So I think these investments will try to facilitate that. And the industrial planning that China is doing, the 5-year plan, the next stage, I think the digital economy, health economy is emphasized, and the ecological economy are 3 really emphasized areas. And given that I do believe China's outbound investment is a contingent on the domestic economic priorities. So I think those are the areas we'll see more change.
I know that, like you said, some of it is reactive and some of it is proactive, because I think what we're seeing in the early days from the Biden administration is that even in their call with Prime Minister Trudeau here in Canada, talking heavily about the reorganization of those supply chains and manufacturing, even from the U.S. side. And I think given how China has been such an integral part to global supply chain, any other country of significance who is talking about a reorganization of their supply chain, China has to take notice and understand and try to anticipate what the impact is going to be for them back home.
Yeah, that's right. So the digital, the logistics, and then supply chain, and this actually I think will go together. But of course, all China policy will be implemented in a very fragmented way. So I don't think we'll see a drawing board and telling us where it's going. But these might be some areas that we can see. Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit. We're going to come back to the BRI because I think that's one of the more fascinating things we want to get to. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about China and the recent free trade agreement. Is there any difference between their approach in bilateral versus multilateral agreements?
Yeah, so I think the Chinese globalization, I call it, it's very Chinese elite thinking, and the policy establishments do have strong conviction in globalization, but their perspective of globalization is very pragmatic, right? So it doesn't really prioritize one way over the other. The bilateral, minilateral, regional, global are always pursued. But then which way will be more salient? And that depends on China's internal readiness and the external environment. So I'll use the RCEP as an example. So this November 2020 signed Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And this one was proposed by ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Countries, in 2011. And China was actively involved, but it was not enthusiastically pursued. And that's because China felt that having the multilateral agreements with ASEAN in the driver's seat was acceptable, but not very passionate about. And then so when China pursued the Belt and Road Initiative, and its most progress was achieved in Southeast Asia. Right? So when they built this separate China-led regional networks and connections, and they feel the ASEAN's centrality role in the RCEP was already offset. So it's less incentivizing. And then the other condition is U.S.-China hostility. Right? So the U.S. Hostility toward China really pushes China think more pragmatically how they can change the environment of this great power competition, how they can further bound ASEAN with China's economy, so that it creates a constraint on this bilateral great power conflict. I think that also applies to the China's negotiation with Europe, which was signed in December 2020.
How on the other side are partners, how are partner nations maybe changing their approach to China maybe over the past few years, maybe due to China stepping up and being a little bit more assertive?
Yeah, so China is certainly more assertive, but it didn't work, right? So you have to separate China's assertive rhetoric that is launched by these propaganda people, and so they call 外宣, right? So 外宣 tends to be it speaks to the more nationalist wing inside the country, right? And also to show that we have our voices too. Right? So, but then you look at the more systematic policy level actions like China's trade relations or investment projects and and the projects in the BRI or negotiation with BRI, those were continued by pre-existing business networks and I think bureaucracy networks and a think tank involvement. So that's a separate issue. But the bureaucracy, of course, realized these hawkish voices were counterproductive. Right? And so as China's economic presence in ASEAN increases, they also face a lot of backlash. Right? So Indonesia would be open arm at one point, and then quite skeptical on another. But I think the China's have dealt with East Asian countries for so long. So this dichotomy, this sometimes close, sometimes more distant, this phenomena is a pretty much a normalcy for them. Bottom line is the Southeast Asian countries, including Vietnam and Philippines, do not want to make a choice. And they all want to be more integrated with Chinese economy, but not in the political economic sense, right? So they want to have stable and beneficial economic relationships, and without being forced to accept the power from China. So that's why you can see them try to play this hedging. Hedging is not just diplomatically close to both, but also hedging means security on one side, economy on the other, like building relationship with these people, but also building relationship with other groups in China. Right? So hedging has been done quite systematically in Southeast Asian countries.
Let's turn our attention to the Belt and Road Initiative now. Let's talk a little bit about, and if you want to give some background color, a little bit on the Belt and Road Initiative to help answer maybe what is the future. I know that you talked a little bit about some of the countries that they're going to focus on, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on why or why not Africa, but what is the future of the BRI?
I do like life cycle analysis of the BRI, right? So I know that when BRI, before BRI's launch, and I was like doing research in Beijing on China's responses to TPP and how China would accept or not accept the RCEP. And so I was right in Beijing, and I know how imperialized or paralyzed these think tank policy people felt because they saw RCEP not as very attractive, but TPP was so aggressive, right? And they just feel what they could do, and so I see the bigger problem, of course, was China's economic overcapacity. Right. So economic overcapacity, and the technocrats were arguing for investing overseas and expanding overseas market, but that involves spending Chinese money, right? And then you lived in China before. The Chinese public actually have quite aggressive ownership sense over Chinese money, right? So they say, why do you spend money in other countries to benefit the state-owned company, right? You should spend in our own schools, our own kids, our poor regions. And so basically, I observe, as I document in the book, is when China faced this geostrategic pressure, the diplomatic problem, and economic problems, and the bureaucracies and the policy experts had proposals, but none of these proposals could become a national policy that would be accepted by the other bureaucracies or society. So when the leader made these two very short and unclear announcements on the Silk Road economic belt and the maritime Silk Road. The bureaucracies, the policy networks just seized the opportunity, and they saw that the BRI could address their problems. So that's why we begin to see the BRI would be promoted by different people and justified with different motivations. And I feel like the West understanding of it has been first it was slower because they didn't see the kind of debates going on in China, and so they started by I call it dismissal, and because they felt that BRI was so hollow, you don't see concrete projects. And then in 2017, when the first summit was held, and the Chinese leadership now gained all government consensus and all society support of the BRI. And so the leadership had, I think the Chinese leadership also felt the moment was right? So it was quite high profile, called this is a project of the century, and then announcing large sum investment money, like $1 trillion in total investments. So then the external views were this is a major grand strategy to dominate, to achieve the China dream. Right? And then that, of course, was not correct, because once you go beyond these headline numbers and the geostrategic rhetoric, will find on the ground the state investors or the local governments or private business, they expanded their interest in investing overseas, but the rationale is still very much whether they make money and whether this project makes commercial sense. And again, it's also because it's so myopically structured in commercial sense, and yet legitimized by the strategic rhetoric at the top. So we kind of see this backlash from both politics and from the ground economic fallout. So I think now in my conversation with a strategist in this country, I feel like people are going back to being dismissive, right? So the BRI is actually not the real challenge to our power, right? So I say, well, maybe now actually the Chinese, after 7 years of trial era, and they begin to have a clearer idea what they can accomplish and what they cannot accomplish in the BRI. So I do see a sharper focus and clearer content, right? So they perhaps are becoming much risk consciousness now, and try to work with recipient governments more, society more, and try to create less political and social impacts, and also avoid large-scale infrastructure, but do smaller infrastructure, and particularly with digital infrastructure at the core, and by also creating different institutional mechanisms in the BRI implementation, and trying to make it more acceptable. But if BRI does go this way, and is that more challenging or less challenging? You perhaps don't see as much economic footprint, but that actually is going to be more like a strategy than before. Right? So that's I recently warned my strategist friends, just as you guys dismiss it, maybe it's the time we see a new, more robust BRI, less costly, but perhaps more influential for China.
Let's change gears here for the last topic, which is the U.S.-China relations. So do you see the relationship with China, between China and the U.S., changing significantly under this new Biden administration?
Yeah, so this is a very good question, and I think many people dismiss Biden's change in style from Trump administration as being insignificant, and I disagree. In dealings with China, style matters hugely. I feel like Americans suddenly forgot that it's about face and relationship when you work with China.
It's such a good point, by the way. That is such a good point.
Yeah, because it's like in the last few years, in particular in 2020, it was so awful, and it was just so awful because the administration style targeting at Chinese people, and it's just stopping all the normal exchange, dialogue, and respect, right? And so Biden's coming to power, even just not changing any substantial policy, but by appearing normal and nicer. And we already see that the Chinese were sending all kinds of pragmatic calls for cooperation, right? And they didn't say that you should change this or change that, but they say we should 相向而行. So you walk toward each other, and it's just in the last few weeks, the Chinese policy specialists and the government's diplomats held many conversations internally and with the United States, and sending all these positive messages and asking for multilateral cooperation, asking for bilateral dialogues. And even when the Biden administration also criticized on issues on Xinjiang or Taiwan, Hong Kong, and same continuity in the technology, security, and the recent overview of the supply chains, right? And the Chinese response was not like hawkish. They repeated that domestic politics are our red line. Don't interfere in our Xinjiang. Don't interfere in our Hong Kong affairs. Right? And these are lasting differences. So they just repeat their stances. And with Biden's technology security continuity, this again continuing from the previous administration, the Chinese is just doing their own security, technology security oversight or overview. And then with supply chain, their response is decoupling will not work. But as I said, China has already been planning on supply chain reorientation and making it more resilient and more crisis shock proof. Right? And so they say they are saying Biden's work may not work, but it's not like taking to the sense of being hostile. And then on the other hand, I do see them, the two countries and broader global players to have dialogues in public health, as we are so deeply in the crisis, and climate will be one, and technology security, and setting some kind of normal, accountable, transparent rules for business and cultural exchange. I think that those areas will be very welcome by both countries. So again, I do believe style change doesn't matter. Style change matters a huge amount.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Even from all my time in China, I know this to be 100% true. Even if the Biden administration fundamentally, like from a policy perspective, didn't change anything, just a difference in tone, a show of respect, and treating each other like good people, a respectful communication, a good tone, that can change everything. And if that does change, as we hope that it does, where do you think, just to close out this entire podcast, where do you think the opportunities to then collaborate economically between China and the U.S., where do those lie?
Yeah, I think the areas of cooperation are quite clear, right? So climate, health, energy, technology, and business, non-essential business operations. But I feel that the Biden administration so far, because it's so busy with domestic issues, the U.S. might be quite slow in catching up. Right. And then China is doing it already. And perhaps China and its Asian neighbors are doing a lot of those already. Europe may be part of it, but the U.S. Perhaps can catch up when lots of these global initiatives or the global corporations are being discussed. For example, the debt issue. Right? So now it's that to overcome the pandemic, how you can distribute vaccine as effectively, as globally as possible. Right? That task is already very gigantic. But once that's done, it's global reconstruction. It's the debt issue. So many of the countries are so overwhelmed with debt, and I don't know. Without the U.S. active participation, whether any of those global discussions can be conducted. One thing is, I feel China doesn't want to lead because it's not ready, but it will be very cooperative in the discussion, and the U.S. needs to be leading, but the U.S. now it's just I feel it has too much going on in Washington. So hopefully the rest of the world do more.
Yeah, the Biden administration was left with a bit of a hot mess to try to clean up domestically. And I think that's going to be the focus for the first year, is to try to right that ship and repair some of the damage before starting to look over. So I think the rest of the world has a little bit more time to prepare for the future relationship with the U.S., including the U.S.-China relations. Professor Migne, thank you very much for this. I can't tell you how much of a pleasure this was. You have incredible insights. Where can people after this podcast go to find more from you and potentially purchase your book?
You can Google my name and you'll find my professional, my institutional website. And there it lists the articles, like I have an article on China BRI after COVID in Asia policy, and I have an article on U.S.-China competition in the last 10 years in the Journal of War and Peace Studies. And I have another forthcoming article in the Washington Quarterly, and these are all available on my institutional website. I also have a profile on ResearchGate. So ResearchGate is a free scholarly sharing website, and most of the materials I post there free. And my two books, the Cambridge University books, are what they call Cambridge Core. So all university libraries, most of university libraries around the world have subscription to Cambridge University Core, so they can download the books chapter by chapter free.
Great option for students as well there. Yeah. That's amazing. Professor Ye, thank you again so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate your time.
Okay, well, thanks. It's my pleasure.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。